You've heard me talk about it for a few weeks now, and it's finally here. The live recording from NCECA. I resisted the urge just there to say live from NCECA. It's the Maker's Playbook. Okay, so I still did it. Anyway, spoiler for you. Per Paul's request, Paul of the Potter's Cast, who I did this recording with, this became much more Paul interviewing me rather than the joint interview that was initially envisioned. And boy, do I now have a better appreciation for the unique torture I put our guests through. A very big thank you to every single maker who has said yes and continues to say yes to being interviewed. Because my goodness, is it nerve-wracking. And clearly, as you will soon see or hear, humor is my default nervous processing mechanism. So, an additional thanks to the absolutely full room we had of potters who were kind enough to laugh at my really bad jokes. One other huge thank you is due before we get into this live recording, and that goes to Ben Carter and the Brickyard Network for making all of the podcast recordings that happened live at NCECA possible. This episode wouldn't have been possible without Ben's help. This episode also was made possible in part by our sponsor, Amico.
Hi, I'm Jake, purchasing agent at Amico, providing you with everything you need for clay. This episode is brought to you by Amico Brent. Find your favorite Amico glazes or Brent equipment at your local distributor. Cheers for listening. Happy glazing.
And now, on with the recording of a live show. Welcome to the Maker's Playbook, the show where we talk all about what it's really like to make a living from the things you make. I'm your host, seasoned entrepreneur of 13 years, Rebecca Ikes-Cara.
Well, I am Paul Blaze, and this is Rebecca Kiss Me Kama.
Shouldn't have touched.
No, I kiss.
So close.
I kiss.
So close.
I kiss.
Yes,
It
there
kiss.
it is.
I kiss.
Nope. We all kiss for no. It's
Okay, I have
anybody
to be
else on
honest,
ice cream?
When I was doing the promoing for this on the Potter's Cast, I was so nervous to say your name.
It's normal.
So I recorded it once and I totally butchered it, and I thought to myself, I need to redo this. I got to go back and listen. So I went.
You could have just
I
called me.
listened to her. To your podcast, and I went back and I re-listened to it, and then I went back and I re-recorded just that part of it and pasted it over my butchering of it. So then the rest of it, I was too nervous to say it, and so I just said Rebecca, and that was good enough for me. So
It's Ikes-Cara.
Ikes-Cara, yeah. So she told me before, and I knew that there was kissing going on, but I didn't know the way that it was supposed to go. So
It's not always a helpful reference.
Rebecca and I both have kind of the same general gist of the podcast that we do. When I started the Potter's Cast, I was doing it as the idea of the business of clay, and it is kind of morphed to be more the conversation of clay with a little bit of a leaning towards business. Rebecca, on the other hand, is a business person. She is like telling the story, interviewing people, asking the questions that are digging down to help to give that pathway, because really if you're going to go down a road, it's best to have directions, and she is trying to provide that. And so if you go through her Instagram and you punch her bio link, it's got options to be able to do counseling, to be able to get involved in a community, to her website. So she's really an amazing person to be able to talk to about the business of clay. And we're going to be talking today about the idea of building that pathway to business and looking towards the customer relationships that I think is probably one of the most critical things that we have to have in our process of building a business. I've owned multiple businesses throughout my adult life, and one of the most significant ones that we have to have is that relationship with customers. And so what we're going to do is kind of go down that pathway about what are you bringing to your customers to build that kind of a relationship so that you can have repeating customers? When I talk about finding new customers, I can tell you that there's two types of customers. One is a super expensive customer to get, and that's a new customer. And then there's a customer you already have, and they're the least expensive prospecting because you've already started that relationship. So what I'm going to do is ask Rebecca questions about this because she is so much more of an expert in this field that I'm really just want to be the dummy here and learn along with y'all about this. So first off, let me just ask you, your real profession starts out as a photographer, correct?
Yep.
And then how's your connection with ceramics?
This was not on the precursor question. I'm not shit. Now I know how I make everybody else feel all the time. So I started a photography company 13 years ago because it was the recession, so I couldn't get a good job. Mm-hmm. And that's truly how I started business. Not the most planned out way. So do what I say, not what I do, as my father always says. And then I got into clay. Well, I got into clay before my photography business. I worked for a nonprofit after-school art center in Newcastle upon Tyne, England. If you think you know what a British accent sounds like, I bet you haven't been to Newcastle, just for the record. So I helped run a ceramics room there with a woman who actually knew what she was doing. And then as many the story goes, you've got to get a job, you go home, I start a business. Photography turns out to be mostly on the computer anymore. And clay is therapy, right? I'm preaching to the choir here. I don't have to tell that part of the story. And I basically build my life now around like, how can I spend more time with clay, right? How can I get off the computer and get back into this? And then to make a very long story short, I was at a community studio in Chicago. The woman who runs that studio told me about this place in Italy where you can go and play with clay for long periods of time. And I did that. And then I found myself falling into a Hallmark movie and met this guy who's going to hate that I'm calling him out publicly over here. Signed some legal paperwork, exchanged some rings, and he happens to be a production potter. So here we are. There's a lot more details, but we can talk about that at Rheingeist later because we only have an hour and we want lots of time for Q&A. So I'm gonna say that now to everyone. Mentally prepare, because if you want to ask a question, you have to come up to that guy here because that's how audio works for podcasting. So lots of time in about a half hour if I don't keep rambling.
So one of the things that I know when you're especially if you're starting out as an artist or trying to start any kind of business, regardless whether you're trying to do a ceramic deal or not, it's just finding your customers and figuring out what it is that your customers want or do. And so that's part of basically the research process. And so what kind of research should a person go through to be able to find that customer base and find where they're hanging out and what they're doing?
Yep. So we kind of outlined this a little bit earlier, and I've been thinking about it over the weeks and have been in conversation with other people in podcast episodes you guys may or may not have already listened to. And I realized I jumped the gun on that a little bit because in traditional business, yes, if a guy on Shark Tank is going to decide if he's going to invest in a business or not, they're going to do market research. That's what we're talking about. In the arts world, we're a little different, right? Because you need to do research, but you also need to actually like what you do. That's the one through line after 2 years of interviews so far, and that's nothing compared to the Potter's Cast interviews. But every person has said, whether they do production work, whether they do functional, whether they do sculpture, slipcasting, whatever, every single person has said you have to actually enjoy what you make. Because otherwise you're gonna burn out. And even when you enjoy what you make, you might burn out. Spoiler. And so I think before we get into market research, you have to actually figure out what you like making. And I don't mean perfectly, right? Because it's going to change over time. But you have to play around with the craft. And the one for your own mental well-being, one so you actually like what you do. But the other kind of cautionary tale with that is I think if we jump to market research first, and I'm saying this, look, like pot black. I have started in a community studio, started loving it, got asked to make a set of bowls, and I made 50 of them to deliver a set of 6, and they're horrific, and I'm embarrassed whoever owns them. But that's the market research approach, right? Is because if you start with the research, you go on the internet and you see what's popular, and you think, okay, if I want to make a living at this, then I'm going to make this thing because it's clearly popular. But the scary part is if you do that, odds are, even if you don't intend to, even if you have the best of heart and intentions, the likelihood that you're going to wind up copying someone or appropriating another culture.
Yeah, but you only copy if you're desperate.
Well, yes and no, though, right? Because we have so much input coming into our brains, and yes, it's inspiration.
Well, I've done that myself, where I accidentally copied someone because I'd spent so much time looking at his work.
Exactly.
And then one day I was just playing in my studio and in my stories, and someone called me and said, "Why are you making your stuff look like so and so's work?" And I was like, "Oh my gosh, it does!" And so I sent it to him.
Right.
And I gave the other ones to my neighbors.
But thankfully somebody called you, right? Because it might not happen. It might be that then, oh, I love this piece. And, you post the photo on Instagram because because some redheaded goofball told you how to take photos better. And so then you posted it, and then it got popular. And then, and then you started selling them. And then somebody who you actually got that inspiration from is like, oh, well, this feels shitty because I actually told you how I made that. And I was excited for you to learn this craft. Mm-hmm. So I hesitate to start with market research because, yes, we're inspired by each other, but we also need to kind of carve our own spot.
Well, let's say we've assumed that we're to that point that we know what we like to make, and we're raring to go, and we've got a bunch of finished wares that they have to find a home.
Yep.
And so now you've gotten past the point of where what your niche is going to be, or your niche, depending upon where you're from. So what's that process then of finding those folks?
This is the part nobody likes to hear because it's mostly trial and error. Everybody wants the solution, right? Everybody wants the quick and what's the sure thing?
Right.
And look, I am type A to the core. Anybody who knows me know I have a system for anything. I've systematized photography at this point. I have systematized pricing. I have systematized our house projects. That doesn't work. And you do have to, you don't want to skip the trial and error part because you're going to learn so much about who you're selling to. Because number one, sales is a skill. Just like centering, just like any other thing that we do, any craft, sales is a skill unto itself. Mm-hmm. So you have to practice it. You have to, people think, oh, I'm so uncomfortable with it. Or, oh, that's not for me. I'm not a born salesperson. I've just been doing it for 13 years.
So it's like a muscle.
Yeah.
It's a muscle. Like the more you flex, it's going to be uncomfortable initially. And then
100%.
The more you get uncomfortable, you have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
That's actually the entire answer to this whole thing. That's the end of the podcast, guys. Thank you.
See you.
And now to the bar. So you do have to, there's a million business models out there, right? You can find one that works for you. There's no single answer. This all sounds very trite coming out of my mouth. My God. But there are some truths within those. So trial and error, but to go back to your original question as far as finding your people, there are some truths within that in terms of if you are only going to sell local, then where you live is going to matter. If you're going to sell on the internet, well, now the world is your oyster, but how are you going to rise above the noise? You may not have to rise as, I'm mixing my metaphors here. If you only sell local, it's like being a big fish in a little pond, potentially, if your pond is little. If you're in a major urban environment, well, then maybe not. Maybe the internet is easier. And so you're constantly monitoring and observing, where do I want to be and what works for my life?
How about teaming up? Like if you're let's just talk about being local, that if you're in a local situation and teaming up with 5 other established potters and do a pop-up, something like that, is that a good process to be able to gain reputation through association?
Oh, reputation through association, I would say, is literally how the Maker's Playbook podcast is here today and staring at a very full room. Hi, guys. Absolutely. You know, I sent messages on the internet 2 years ago to some people on Instagram and I was like, hey, I want to talk about this. Will you give me an hour of your time? Mm-hmm. And then Camille Beckles of Camille at the Wheel was the very first person to say yes. And she posted it. And that got out to a heck of a lot of people. And Cara and Ben and, you know, they've all got way bigger audiences than I still have to this day. And that's very okay. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think that can maybe speed it up a little bit, but also making sure then, mm-hmm. even with other potters or stores or markets, they all have their own audiences, right? So then are their people your people? Maybe they are, maybe they're not. There's a perfect example of a maker I know locally who did like a couple of different shows in the same year, or actually there's a few people who have done this, where sold amazingly at one show, right? Practically sold out. Went to another show, same city, same time of year, barely sold anything. But she realized instead of feeling crappy, like we usually do, like, okay, nobody likes my work, I need to change something, I need to do market research to see what's popular, she just realized like, oh, the audience of people coming to this first show, they were 20-somethings in college and loved kind of edgy stuff that she did or whatever. This other show she did was maybe a slightly older crowd, maybe a little bit more conservative crowd, maybe didn't want like edgy one-off pieces but wanted stuff to match. Like it wasn't a reflection of what she was making as being good or bad. It was just who was in the room. So
part of that's like the research of you're just, mm-hmm. you're, what you said, trial and error, you're testing the waters. What about so that's a way of like thinking about it in terms of like in face-to-face, building locally. If you're trying to build on social media, is there a strategy of associating with other people in, like just because I saw so many hands with Instagram, we'll just talk about that, yep. of where we go onto their audiences and do a lot of comments, a lot of like likes, just to be able to create a relationship to where it gets fed back to you somehow. Because I'll go through comments and I'll not follow, but I'll start jumping around to see what people are doing in the comments.
I think it depends on why you're doing that in the first place.
To find customers.
Right. So people can sniff out. I think we all have these spidey senses, right? Like, you know, when you get a phone call or an email, or like if your house is a fixer-upper and people drive by, so they come up and they knock on the door because they're selling windows, just hypothetically. You know when someone's trying to sell you something, right? So there's a different feeling when someone is trying to seek you out to sell something to you because they've done their market research.
Right.
Like, let me back up a little bit to give a realistic example. So photography, for example, right? I've been a photographer for 13 years. I started a photography styling course a couple of years ago to help potters and ceramicists take better photos of their work. Because I was already in a ceramics community where people were like, oh my God, how do I do this? This is the worst. And it is. But it can be easier. That's my approach of that conversation is entirely different because I feel that need. I understand what it is. I'm on both sides of that table. As opposed to, I don't know, a Shark Tank person, again, like some tech investor, venture capitalist, whatever, somebody who understands business, who's looking out at the world going, well, ceramics is having a hot minute. This seems popular. Everybody's doing this now. What can I sell to them to make a buck? Mm-hmm. Oh, there's all these Etsy people. Some of these Etsy photos don't look so hot. Let me sell a photography course so that people can sell, because I'm going to prey on their need, their felt need, their concern to, to make $1. You can feel the difference.
It's an interesting idea. So you're talking about solving a problem for someone, mm-hmm. and that's a big reason why businesses get started, is because there's a problem in the world, and a business person, an entrepreneur, she will see the problem and she will come up with the solution. Mm-hmm. So let me ask you about that. Like, when we're talking about our mugs, how can we use what we're making at the wheel or on the slab table with slip casting, how do we answer that problem in someone's life that we're bringing to them a solution to something? So how are we solving a problem as artists?
And this is the tricky thing about art. This is going to be a very unpopular thing. So don't record just this sentence. Get the after the but of what I'm about to say, right? Don't go political on me here with taking snippets. Do we solve a need? Maybe not. Everybody in this room has probably made a cylinder in some form you could drink out of in some form, which you could also get in plastic. Don't, please. You could also get in, I know you love plastic, Becca. I know. But we're speaking to something else. We're speaking to a desire. We're speaking to it, as much as we don't want it to be, and as much as art can have such a beautifully dramatic impact on the world and culture, at the end of the day, we are a luxury. I don't want it to be a luxury. I don't believe that in my soul. But in terms of am I going to buy groceries or am I going to buy a freaking soft-bottomed cup that feels good in my hands? If I have to choose between those two things, I am going to buy groceries first.
Right.
That's just Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody, thank you. Yeah. So we have to speak to something else then, right? We have to connect with people in a different way in terms of their aesthetic preferences, in terms of how they identify themselves in the world. So to connect this to finding people on Instagram or on the internet, it's thinking about what kind of room does my mug fit in? Does it fit in a room where people buy the throw pillows at Target? Does it fit in the room where people buy the throw pillows at Restoration Hardware? Does it fit? Somebody give me some other stores because I hate shopping. So this is
7-Eleven?
7-Eleven. Great example. But, you guys can picture when I say these rooms, if you think about the living room in the catalogs of these stores, they're pretty different rooms, right? And there's no right or wrong. There's no good or bad. They're just different. And so figuring out where your pieces fit within that will then start to tell you, well, who are the people that shop at those places? How much do they expect to spend when they walk into that store? Okay, we should take Target out of this example. Let's go Walmart and West Elm, right? Those are two different places with two completely different socioeconomic realities, to where also when people start to say, oh, raise your prices, they're too cheap, or, oh my God, this mug is $65? Who would pay $65? And meanwhile, we're all like, you do know so-and-so sells their mugs for $115, right? 65 is nothing. It's all relative. There's no perfect right price. Sorry. There's no, it's all, the more you learn about who those people are who connect with your stuff, the easier it will get. Now, the hard part is finding them in the first place. And that's getting out there and trying and seeing what sticks. I didn't start following Hope, for example. You're in my line of sight, so that's going to get, sorry. I didn't start following her because I was like, oh, she's got a bigger audience than me. And so if I start liking people's comments, maybe they're going to come over to my Instagram and
Hope
now I'll
you're
gain
going to help
followers.
out with that for everyone now?
So
Everybody?
They all follow her already.
There we
I'm
go.
not worried about it. But I didn't go over there because it was like, oh, this is a good marketing strategy. No, I don't even know. We just started having a conversation, like two humans, like normal people. At the end of the day, many people have heard me say this a lot of times. It's all about just connecting with each other. And then that way we can actually, now the hard part is on Instagram, it's really easy to find other potters. We have no problem doing that. And it's probably why most of us sell most pottery to other potters. So the hard part is then get out of pottery and start teaching the algorithm to show you other things.
So, for instance, try to get involved with home decorators or designers.
Maybe.
Is that what you're suggesting?
It could be that. It's.
Well, I know one guy Turkey Merc. His is all FX.
Yeah.
So he's doing just that type of stuff. So.
Yep. It's not always that direct.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the really I just burped into the microphone. Okay. That's the really annoying part. That's the really frustrating part, is that it's not a direct line. It's not, okay, I'm going to post this many times a day and then engage in this group and expect someone from this group to purchase my piece. Sometimes that happens, and that's flippin' brilliant. But usually it's, I started going to the local Pilates studio because I wanted to feel better. And there was a girl there that, as we were putting our shoes back on at the end of the class, we struck up a conversation, and turns out that she is married to a chef, and he's about to leave the restaurant that he is working at. And 9 months later, she calls me to say, oh, hey, I remembered we were talking. Didn't you marry somebody who makes pots? Do you think you'd want to... This is truly a hypothetical. I'm putting it out into the universe. This would be really cool if this happened. But like, it's not, you get my point, right? You just have to kind of keep putting yourself out there, which is the most difficult thing that you have to build this thick skin for, because you're just doing it all the time, not sure what's going to stick. You don't know
what's going to stick sometimes.
Not at all.
When you've kind of got that idea figured out, okay, I can see a pathway. I can see that there's other people making it. So now I want to treat this like a real business. Mm. Should one take the time to write up like a strategy, a business plan, organize a hierarchy of most important things to be doing?
First, get a separate business checking account so that when taxes come, even if you've done no bookkeeping whatsoever, you don't want to gouge your eyeballs out with a dull spoon. That's just first. And talk to Shanine about taxes, maybe. Just pragmatically speaking.
By the way, that's a really brilliant plan right there.
Because it at least separates the money, even if
Does
it's
that
a
mean
few
like,
dollars.
And then debit card for it too, and...
I mean, choose your bank, and whatever they give you for free, take it, but don't pay for one if you don't have to. But I think a lot of this comes over time, right? You don't have to have a business plan. The beautiful thing about some of this stuff is you can test it out relatively easy, right? You can, if somebody in the room right now has never sold their pots, you could literally log onto your phone and open up an Etsy shop right now. And we could go out to the windows over there and hand me one of your pots, and we'll take some photos, and it'll be great. It'll be good to go. So get momentum. Just start. That's the hardest part. It's like working out. If you don't, you've got to get into a habit, and you've got to get momentum. Once you get that going, and now I'm looking at you because you're a runner. Like, once you get that going, once you get into a habit, then it's easier. Then you can add some complexity. But I think what a lot of us do is we look at, like, okay, I need a business plan. I need a website. I need a brand. I need a social media marketing strategy. I need to know my prices perfectly, and they'll never ever change once I figure it. All of these things are changeable. And I think a lot of us give ourselves a to-do list as a procrastination tactic, right? Because if I finish, I've struck a chord with one person in the room at least. Because I will put myself out there once I finish that list. Now, there's some things I understand that, like, we feel more confident about putting ourselves out there if we put a few ducks in a row. But at the end of the day, you gotta start. And then because the business plan will change, because you'll sell your first, maybe you start at the farmer's market and you realize, I love talking to people in person. I'm learning so much. I'm going to sell in person. Awesome. Or maybe you start at the farmer's market and you realize, I don't want to talk to strangers for 4 hours. That was horrible. Right? So if you took 6 months to write a business plan, and that whole business plan hinged upon selling in person, and then you went and grammar. You went and did it for the first time. And
you've done it the first time, yeah.
You hated it? Well, now what are you going to spend 6 months again rewriting a business plan? Mm-hmm. No, just go do it, and then write the business plan late. Then you'll, as you get comfortable with complexity, you can add complexity. Is that making any sense?
I'm curious about that. I want to go back to something you said a little earlier about flexing that muscle and trying to get, just trying it. I think that who was I talking to today? He said or she said, I hate selling, but I love having sold. And it's like but that process about the selling part, the actual sales pitch can be so scary initially. So I'm curious about what kind of things can we do to flex that muscle to where we can at least sweat our way through it and actually ask for a sale.
Yep. I'm going to give my own personal example that I think applies. So it's going to be about photography, but it works. And the point is to figure out what aspect you are comfortable talking about, right? So, for example, I sell photography services. Sometimes that comes with an album, a book. I feel passionately about the importance of someone having paid me a lot of money, having a tangible thing in their hands to show for it, right? Mm-hmm. Because bear in mind, I started 13 years ago, so people were all like, I don't want you to make an album for me. I want the digital files. I'm going to do it myself. Nobody ever does it themselves. And so if you've just given me thousands of dollars, I want you to have something to show for it. I want your grandkids to inherit this. They're going to find it in an attic one day. They're going to know what it is. If somebody finds an USB in the attic one day, they're going to throw it away. There's some eyeballs that just got real big who realized they haven't printed out their wedding photos. That just happened. So I can speak passionately about albums. And so I started selling. I increased my price, for example, on albums faster than I increased my price for my services. Because I didn't value me. I couldn't sit comfortably in the room and somebody asked me, so if I wanted to hire you for family photos, how much is it going to be? I couldn't be like, well, that's going to be $650. See, I just stumbled now, and I've been doing it for 13 years. But I can tell you, I have no problem sitting here and saying, well, if I'm going to make an album for you, that's going to be $1,500.
Can I make a point on that? Mm-hmm. That because I think it's so beautiful what you just said, is the idea that you are not your customer. And because you may feel uncomfortable about buying an $80 or a $100 or $200, whatever the piece is that you're doing, because you know what your finances are, you don't know their finances. And it's okay for you to just say flat out, yeah, it's a whatever your price is, whatever it is, let's just talk about a picture or whatever. It's $200. And it's okay for you to be confident about that, even if you don't feel it, because you wouldn't feel that. It's okay because that person, she's money bags. She's the sugar mama, and we can sell to her with confidence that she has the cash, and it's okay that she wants to spend that money. You might think that's foolishness for anybody to spend that kind of money, but it doesn't matter. I will deal with people where I will sell them something that costs them, well, I'm thinking of one project right now. It was a $50,000 project on extras.
You selling $50,000 in clay and asking me
the
questions?
No, not in clay. This is in my other business. And so but it's not my problem that I would never do that. I couldn't afford that. I'm like, no, I couldn't do it. But they can because they have different finances than I am. So I wanted to just say it's really brilliant for her to say that, is that your customer is not. You are not your customer. It's okay to be confident to say something about your product that regards to the prices, they can walk away. It's okay if they walk away. They're not walking away from you. They're just saying, no, I don't want to do it for that. And that's okay. So I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, what you were saying just reminded me of something, because I imagine you know why you're charging $50,000 for that job, for whatever job it is. Because if you don't know why you're charging what you're charging, then that's when we all start to sweat, right? So when somebody walks up to you and it's like, well, why is your mug $65? That seems high. If all you did was go to Etsy and look at the average range and went smack dab in the middle and said, all right, well, that's what I'll sell for, or went a little bit under because you're a hobbyist or you're new and you feel like it's not as good quality. I'm saying all of this because I've done all of this. it's really hard to stand up to someone looking at you saying, why? Why do you charge that much? But when you know, well, my clay costs this much, my community studio costs this much, my cost of firing costs this much, and actually to pay myself a livable wage, I didn't say minimum, I said livable. To pay myself a livable wage, I also lose 30% to taxes. Now, you're maybe not going to say all of this to a customer. I mean, if you are, more power to you. Go for it. But also some people whatever, it's your business, you have expenses. Then you don't want to necessarily open up that door because then they're going to question like, well, why does your studio rent cost that much? Why don't you not live in New York City? Why don't you go live somewhere else? Whatever. You get my point. So if you know in your brain, though, why you have to charge that much, and if you lower it by $10, it means you're not going to pay yourself a wage and you might struggle to buy groceries next week, or heaven forbid, go on a vacation every once in a while, or put a little money into a retirement fund, then you know, okay, I have to keep this price. This is why. Whether you tell the person asking you or not, you can say with assurance, like, yes, it's $65. And also just pragmatically, I had a mentor tell me once, like, stand in the mirror, look yourself in the face, and just repeat the price over and over again. It's weird. You're going to feel weird. It sounds really stupid, but it helps. It helps. Just stand there and look yourself in the face and say, yes, this is this much. This is this much. Over and over and over again. It's amazing. It sounds really stupid, but it works.
I like things that work. Yeah.
Funny how that
I heard a comedian saying recently, he said that we can trick our brains into feeling a certain way. Like even like you can tell yourself if you're depressed, just to smile and you'll start feeling better. Mm-hmm. And he said, it's so weird because they were there in the planning process. Like both sides of your brains is there for the planning process. He said it's kind of like conjoined twins trying to throw a surprise birthday party for the other one. So the thing is, you can trick yourself into, even though you feel uncomfortable, you can trick yourself into becoming comfortable by doing what you just described. Mm-hmm. So,
yep.
Twin up your brain.
I had a segue point, and this
is
the difference between a live recording and a recording where we get to take out the part.
Oh, you take stuff out?
No. No. Only moments like this.
Well, let me ask you about that. Today's episode that is coming out in the Potter's Cast is titled. Pardon me?
That was a smooth plug.
No, I'm not.
This is what happens when you practice, guys. When you give a pitch, it doesn't sound like a pitch.
No, there's no pitch. 921. But anyhow,
potterscast.com/ makersplaybook.com.
Sherrod Falks, amazing dude. The guy is so full of fire and fun, and it was one of my favorite conversations ever.
Maker's Playbook before.
Yes, he was, and he mentioned you. And so here's the gig: is he said we're selling fantasies, and I'm wondering about that idea about when we're trying to feel comfortable in making sales and just asking for what we want for our work. Do we have to get comfortable with that idea too, that I'm selling a little bit of a mirage?
That is a way bigger question than I was prepared for. I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind, and I don't know if it might be a dodge, this might not be a clear answer, is we live, well, maybe not all of us live in Western culture if people are traveling, but let's just assume we live in Western culture where we have to we provide for our life with money, right? We are surrounded by capitalism. One way or another, you have to make money to pay your bills. And this is my soapbox moment, because I feel like in art school or wherever, it's always like, oh, but I love my craft. And it's somehow, for some godforsaken reason, we make selling our work to be this it's less than, right? People aren't putting stuff in museums for free. They're getting paid to put the installment in the museum. It doesn't take away. You just have to pay your bills. If you get to do that by making the world a little bit more beautiful, well, isn't that better than, I don't know, being an investment broker or So that's judgmental. That wasn't fair. That's
Okay, they're not here.
right. And my friend who's one doesn't listen to my podcast, so it's fine. Taking advantage of somebody, right? Isn't that better than to go back to the need concept? I'm going to do a big loop around here. You mentioned earlier that businesses are created out of need. When someone sees a need, they create a business. That's true. There's also a lot of businesses that are created out of exploiting a need, out of saying, in this crazy busy world, you need time to rest. Therefore, buy this pillow because you will magically gain more rest. Well, no, you'll gain more rest by saying no to something you said yes to and having one less thing on your to-do list so you can sit on the damn couch. You don't need necessarily to buy the $120 pillow that has magical whatever. So it's... You get where does this making sense? Like
I'm following you. That was a great
place.
loop to loop right there.
It's a whole different
that
place
was like acrobatics that were on a whole other level.
But that's, I think the one thing I notice, a lot of people are really worried about losing integrity when they're selling work or whatever other moral, not wanting to make it about the money because they don't care about money, they don't want to become rich, et cetera, et cetera. Anybody who tells me they're worried about that, I'm like, awesome, go sell your stuff. Because if you're worried about it, you're probably not going to do it. If you are worried about becoming greedy or not being, to steal Rose's terms, to be honoring being a guest in this place, if you're even thinking about being a guest in a place, you're probably being a little bit more respectful than bro down the street who's like, ooh, I did my market research. I see an opportunity. I am going to sell this product and make lots of money.
Okay, we're getting close to Q&A time. So let me ask you one more question before we go to Q&A. How about something as important as keeping track of sales so that you can, because you mentioned earlier about open up a separate bank account from your personal, which is like the absolute bare minimum. But once you've done that, and you start making sales, and even if they may be big or small, it doesn't matter, anywhere in between, you still have to keep track. So what kind of tools should one use to be able to keep track of sales so that they can be repeatable as an option later?
This goes back to our conversation around complexity. If you need to start with a piece of paper, start with a piece of paper. If you start with a Google Sheet, it might be slightly better than a piece of paper just for your own mental well-being. Start with a Google Sheet. You don't have to start with I don't use QuickBooks. QuickBooks is flipping overwhelming to me. Wave app is great. I have a referral code if you want one later. I'll send it to you. But start with wherever you're comfortable to just keep track. And I actually think this is a beautiful way to kind of bring everything together is when it comes to finding your market, when it comes to finding your audience, when it comes to setting your prices, when it comes to sales and bookkeeping and accounting. The more you can keep track of things as you're doing them, a friend of mine uses the metaphor of the scientific process, right? You have hypothesis, you have test, you have results, and then it loops all the way back around. That's all business is. And that's, like, everybody thinks there's a clear answer, but it's literally, you have an idea, you want to make this style mug or whatever, cool. Then you put it out into the world, you see if people like it. Some people like it, some people don't. Some people say it's too expensive, some people say it's too cheap, whatever. You test, you're gaining data points. You're just gaining information and you're storing in that information. It's a lot easier if you store it in a system. But if for now you're storing it in your brain, and you're like, okay, so this group now likes this, so I'm going to go over here. Now I'm going to gain more information. I'm going to test the next thing. And now, okay, that group likes it even more, and we're going to keep going. And it's just, the annoying part for everybody is it's a circle. You just have to, it keeps going. It doesn't actually end, which is probably for some people very disappointing to hear, and for other people it's a relief.
Yeah.
But the same with, use whatever system you've got. I mean, if it starts, Google Sheets is free. If you have the biggest leg up I got is I had a family friend who's a CPA that 13 years, who's also happens to be have a passion for teaching. So 13 years ago, they were like, let me take you under my wing. And I was like, here's all my accounting. Thank you very much. And then they retired. and that sucked.
You caused them. You ran them out of business.
Yes. So,
Okay, so we're going to open up to questions and answers, but Ben made it really clear that he wants us to use the mic right here. So because this is all being recorded. So if you've got questions, you can head that way to that. And
if you hate that, if you really, really don't want to get up and just want to say it from your seat, I'll repeat it here.
Yeah, we could do that. So
do it.
There we go. First one's the hardest. Yeah.
Okay, so I a lot of the times when I'm making something and it takes like 10 or 12 hours or more, I get really attached to it and I don't want to sell it, even though I know I should sell it because I'm a hoarder. But like, so do you have any advice on like what, like I guess like any tips on how to like not get so attached to pieces that you know you have to sell anyway?
Ooh.
Make it a price that makes it worth your while.
Yep. I have to repeat that because Kurt Hammerly messed up there. So Kurt just said, make it a price that makes it worth your while, which is absolutely true. That would be true, though, even if it doesn't take you 10 to 12 hours. The other question I had was, we all jump so quickly to selling stuff, right? And I think it's especially true in ceramics because it takes up space. And I was in an apartment in a city when I first started, and it was like, well, shit, I don't have a place for this, so I need to sell it. There was an interesting conversation I didn't go to that I couldn't make it to, and I'm curious if anybody was in that it might loop around. Do we always have to finish the stuff we're making? Should we always finish the stuff we're making, or was it a beautiful learning process and you cut that shit in half and you go again? So make it a price that it's worth selling, but also, do we always finish, or does it stay with you? I don't know.
Kelsey Barton, that's your name? Oh, thanks for the question. That was a great question. Yeah. Can you say your name also?
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, y'all. I'm Nicole Bernard from NB Makes, based out of Dallas. And part of my clay practice is also communications because I'm a professional communications person. And so mad respect on the podcast front because it's basically about storytelling, right? So there's huge value in just being able to draw those stories out of people. But at the same time, a lot of people are afraid to do that, right? And it's hard to articulate your own stories. So do you have any advice for folks who maybe struggle with that aspect of it and how it comes into the business process?
Do you mean like if they're camera shy, microphone shy?
Yeah, absolutely. If you're afraid to get in front of the camera, or even if you just can't think about why you create what you create, how you can start to articulate that for yourself.
I'll go. I actually have an idea for this. So.
Let's hear it.
Awesome. Don't do it yourself. Have a friend. You know, you ever notice how it's so much easier to talk about somebody else's work? So get a friend to talk about your work. It also makes writing in the third person way less awkward. So you can have a friend do it. If you start to sell work to people who aren't your family and friends, and you get a connection with them, because also the beautiful thing about at least what I was trying to say earlier with market research and things like that is if it starts with genuine connection, you will have friendships that come out of sales. Getting a client to write something about you is flippin' brilliant. I did this a couple of years ago with my photography website, and it changed everything. So if you, a friend or a client, whoever.
Yeah, I would just to riff on your idea, which I thought was super smart, is that if you gathered a group of people for an evening and just talk about your work, hear what they say. A lot of times the discomfort is not knowing how to articulate it. And so by having somebody, like a group of you, talk about it together, you can see a pattern that will come out of it. And then as you get the elevator pitch, so to speak, about your work, it becomes so easy. Then you don't have to know everything. I mean, you don't have to have something creative to say every time. You just have to say it like it's the first time you said it before, and then say the same thing again and again. I do that all the time in lighting design, where I explain the different ways that lighting is supposed to be done, and every time I sound brilliant because they don't know what's going on, but I do, and I make it sound like it's the first time I've ever said it to them. Get that elevator pitch that you can just repeat again and again. Yeah, Great question. Super good. Yeah.
I'm gonna jump in. I locked eyes, but it just made me think of one other thing because I think it connects to a number of mediums of whatever you're trying to do. If you're trying to do it for yourself, I had somebody in our community, which is a online platform that you can join. There's your pitch. There's some people in the room if you want to learn about it. Who was saying, I can talk about my work so easily. So if I'm at a market, I can tell people about it really easily. But when I try to write a caption for Instagram, I can't do it. And somebody had the brilliant idea to say, well, why don't you turn on the voice to text on your phone and just talk? Just talk the way you would talk at a market, record it, either audibly or like voice to text, so it's in text. Yeah. And then just start taking that, so figure out what the easy route and then, I don't know, use AI or something to like recreate it.
Super good. Super good. Yeah. And what's your name?
Hi, my name is Celie Waddington. I'm an artist based out of Asheville, North Carolina, and I'm a relatively new ceramics artist. And because of that, I've sold a lot of my older pieces, like my beginning pieces, for really cheap, sometimes like $1 or less. So is that a sustainable practice? Is that a good practice? Like if you're not happy with something, is it good to sell it for like less than you would want for it?
I think that's such a good question. Everybody I've ever talked to about ceramics sold work before they should have sold work. And I'm included in that. And it's part of your journey. There's nothing, it's just that you're going to get better and better. And yeah, in 5 years, 6 years, you will look back and someone will say, I still have that $1 mug. And you'll feel that cringe inside of you, like, oh, good night, I shouldn't have done that. But it's okay that was part of your journey. You should embrace that instead of saying, "Guy, that's cringeworthy." Instead, embrace that you sold that. But is it sustainable? Only if you want to live on the streets. So you gotta figure out how to make your work. You have to make your work good enough to be of, because I think that's something that we haven't talked about. We talked about loving your work, but also I think there's something to be said about having work that is worth being sold. And so it's getting good enough to where that pot can be sold. I'm not going to be that dude. I'm not selling my work a lot because I'm still, what I've said from the very beginning of my podcast journey is I'm still a hobbyist. I do it. I have other businesses that I run, and then this is what I do because I love the community is what I'm passionate about. So, but it's okay that you've done it. Embrace that part of the story, but get better and then start selling, raise your prices as your skill goes up. Yeah.
I don't think there's anybody in the room who hasn't done it.
Yeah.
And if you're telling me you haven't, either you had a very smart mentor or you're lying.
Yeah.
So absolutely, I agree. It's not sustainable. And the one, just from a marketing standpoint, is to be careful where you're doing that, right? Because you are, in one way or another, we are giving a brand experience. So we are setting an expectation. So if you are selling pots at discount every week, people are going to expect a discount. For example, does anybody buy clothes at full price? Right? Why would you? Because every clothing company out there, you get a 30% off discount email multiple times a week. So they've trained me to not do that. So I think some of those pieces are the best place, are the things to sell in person because people can see them. They can see whatever flaws or perceived flaws there are. And you can talk about it. You can talk about why it's at a discount, and you can kind of help cover that. Because if it's something that's just up on Etsy, for example, and going after somebody who doesn't know who you are, who has no connection, who doesn't care, then you have to deal with the customer service backlash of that, and that's exhausting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Great question.
Awesome.
And welcome to the community.
Woohoo!
We're so stoked to have you here.
I mean, starting out in clay in North Carolina, you're a little spoiled. Damn. Go for it.
Hey, my name is Andy Boswell. I'm out of New York. I'm actually giving a lecture on crystalline glazes in Junior Ballroom B. if anyone's interested.
Look at that smooth
Right
hit.
on.
That is a practice.
And now I'll sit down.
And now we're done.
So my question is based on the business end of things, but it's mainly specific to when you've already had like a fairly successful career and then you're trying to scale up and hire employees. Found that you add like 1 or 2 employees and you're basically doubling or tripling the size of your business, and it seems like everything breaks. So I wanted to ask if you had advice for people going from a small to a medium-sized business, and also like what sort of resources are there available, because there's tons about starting out, but seems like there's much fewer related to growing larger.
Andy, you and I should have drinks.
Yeah,
This is
sure.
a much longer but yes, answer.
I would.
Yeah, no
I,
shit.
I think that I think that adding the complexity of that, you definitely. I'm going to just give you one bit of advice, and then I'm going to ask someone else to give their 2 cents on it. But I would say one thing for sure is we talked about tracking your expenses. I would find a bookkeeper to help you with that. That would be a major investment unless you're really good with books, because if you get behind on taxes and payroll, you can really have some nightmares that will follow you for decades. So it's really important to make sure you have that. But if you don't mind, Kurt Hammerly raised his hand and said that, or were you saying that you had a thought that you like to input?
I'd be happy to talk to you more one-on-one, but this is something that I've done pretty recently, and it's a horror show.
I've been watching.
And
He actually, spoiler, this was not a question for us.
Aside from getting a Greg, which are you aware? My brother that does everything
Get
for
a Greg.
me. No. Anyway, aside from having a brother that can do anything, take each one of those challenges and just make a list and just work on them one at a time, because as you scale up, it seems like it would decrease complexity, but it increases it exponentially, especially when it comes to a consistency and quality control standpoint. But just break it down into smaller steps and tackle it just like you would when you were smaller. It's just this entire thing as a business is about problem solving, and that stage of it, as Rebecca said, it never ends. It just keeps going. So,
and the truth is that when you add complexity, then you're adding also more problems to solve. There's 9 employees in my company, and with all of us working together, there's a lot of problem solving that has to be dealt with at that point.
I think it's a misnomer that when you scale, you're doing more of what you were doing before. I thought this when I took on other photographers, like, oh, I know how to shoot a wedding. So if I have 2 other people, we're just doing 3 weddings. It doesn't quite work like that. It doesn't. And I think the other big thing that comes to light is, this will come as no surprise to people who know me in the room, is the gaps in your systems. You know, the more things are systematized, and I don't mean in like a soulless kind of a way, but just the more things are tracked and the more things are systematized, the more things you get out of your brain and onto a piece of paper or whatever. It helps with the communication. The other thing that is a longer conversation is the learning the people management, the learning how to figure out who the right people are for the right jobs, and the right, because like a mentor of mine once used the metaphor of like getting on a bus. You might be on the right bus and we're all going to the right destination, but maybe they're in the wrong seat, right? So the person that needs to be the driver is maybe sitting in the back of the bus and they need to be driving, or whatever.
Well said. That's a great analogy. That's a really good analogy.
So it's finding the right people first.
Let me just one last thing that I'll put out there for this. There's a book called The E-Myth, which is, I used to think, I was going to say, it's called The E-Myth, and I think the latest one is The E-Myth
like
Revisited, and E stands for entrepreneur. I used to think that it had to do with You didn't know that? Oh, I thought it had to do with like email. Anyhow, I thought it was online stuff, but it's no. But his deal is that he looks at one business and figures out how to systematize everything. And if you have a system in place, your employees will not, that you will give them a direction that they can follow, and it helps you to understand whether or not they are actually doing what they're hired to do. If you hire them as a vague thing, vagary is misery. So make sure you have very defined processes and systems that they're going to follow. Okay, so I hope that helps.
Which is good for them too, not just
And don't forget to go to his demo, his crystalline demo.
Where was it again?
He's going to make crystals in 1 hour.
This is like above my head.
Bring the mic down.
Okay. Hi, I'm Becca Otis, and this is the last question I was instructed by.
This is our last
Maybe.
question.
Yeah,
I'm
this
so
is
sorry.
But don't worry.
I'm so
Time-wise.
sorry.
But go ahead. Ask your question.
Yeah,
We'll be in the hallway afterwards.
they'll be in the hallway.
We just have to let them in. The
And I was going to suggest E-Myth too, by the way. It's fantastic. You should read it for sure. But my question was more on the side of, like, I think that as a messy profession that we have, I tend to be a messy individual in the sense of like I portray mess. Like I'm a hot mess, right? And
no, Becca, no.
And I'm wondering, like, and I know that a lot of people in the pottery community are a hot mess all the time. And I'm wondering, like, how can you, as a business owner, not be a hot mess for your customers, but still, like, keep your individuality? And, like, you know, like, how do you, like, show them who you are, but also still be composed enough to be respected, I suppose, is the question. Also, come to our talk after this at 2:30 for Wheel Talk and for the Mud Peddlers. Okay, bye.
When I replay this on the Maker's Playbook, which can be found on any of your podcast apps by searching the Maker's Playbook, I want it to end there. Can the recording end on that? I think of it this way. You don't show up to every space in the world the same. And not in a disingenuous way, right? I'm not talking like catfishing. I don't show up to Thanksgiving the same way I show up to girls' night with my colleagues that I've known for 10 years who I've shared many a beverage with together. You know, like I don't I'm going to use this example because it's the only one in my brain and we only have 2 minutes and it's a room full of people. I don't have the same conversations with my colleagues with the people in this room who understand what it's like to make a living from the things we make that I have with my parents who are worried about whether or not we're paying our mortgage, right? Hi, Mom, when you listen, we're okay, don't worry. So I think of it like that. Like, it's like how Beyonce had Sasha Fierce for a while, right? Like it's not putting on a fake mask. It's just a different segment of yourself. Yeah, there's more to it, but go.
Yeah, I think that being a hot mess can be helpful in some cases, but I think that your ultimate goal is to, if you're trying to make sales, you want to at least be able to talk appropriately. But artists are allowed to have all sorts of things go on in their lives, and so it's okay to be who you are as an artist. But you at least have to be able to speak the part. So speaking, I think is getting your elevator pitches, I think, in the right place will make all the difference. And I think knowing your target audience too is really helpful, is when you know what they are looking for and expecting. Okay, I think that we need to wrap this up because we have to be done. But I'd like to just say, on behalf of all of us too, I want to wipe the mud for hands, give you a high five, and lots of love to you. And she wants to say something. Thanks, you guys. We'll all be around here, so good seeing you. Thanks for coming out.
Wow, what a whirlwind NCECA was. And while yes, this was my first time, something tells me any future years are still going to be just as much of a whirlwind. That's kind of the nature of conferences. You pack 3 or 4 days absolutely full of every single possible source of education and inspiration that you can. From main stage keynote speakers to breakout talks about specific subjects or making techniques, and of course, the endless impromptu conversations in the hallways and the entrance lines and the late night hotel bars with fellow makers. Yes, it is inspiring. But it can also be overwhelming. And it can also create a lot of FOMO, or the fear of missing out. Obviously, if you didn't attend NCECA, you get FOMO from that. But also, even if you were there, but didn't know what all was going on, you can ask Ryan Durbin of RD Ceramics and also a co-host of Wheel Talk podcast about my constant fear of missing out leading up to NCECA, and the fact that I asked him to add me to group texts prior to the conference so that my recovering band nerd self could be sure to hang out with the cool kids. FOMO is real, and frankly, it's garbage. I don't want anyone to get FOMO. I want you to make informed decisions that are best for your life. I don't want you to feel pressure to show up to something because you might miss out, but instead put yourself into financial hardship because you couldn't really afford to spend $1,000 on a 5-day trip of hotels and travel, and then another few $100s on top of that for the ticket to the conference, not to mention food for the week. Yes, hugging people in person for the first time after getting to know so many of you online for the last 2 years felt amazing. But you know what also felt amazing? Maybe even more so? Not feeling lost or alone after those 4 days together. And you know why I didn't feel alone after those 4 days? After going from 0 to 60, massive in-person stimulus overwhelm to total quiet back home? Because I have a way to connect with fellow makers 365 days out of the year. I get to feel the love and energy of NCECA whenever I log into our community. I told Francesco multiple times while we were at NCECA that for the first time in over a decade of attending professional conferences, I finally wasn't anxious about making sure that I was in the right room or attending the right talk. I didn't spend our time in Cincinnati worried about making sure I didn't miss out. At the time, I couldn't quite figure out why I felt that way. Because like I said, leading up to NCECA, I was worried about it. And then on our 7-hour drive home through the less than thrilling flat plains of the Midwest, it dawned on me. I didn't feel an urgency to try to connect with every single person in the room because I knew I already had a way to connect in a deep, meaningful, ongoing, sustainable kind of way. You know, the way most friendships and support networks are actually really built. I'm sharing my own aha moment with you now because I've been a little hesitant in sharing too much about my NCECA experience on social media for my own fear of creating more fear, more FOMO. Our community is an international group of makers. It wasn't going to be possible for half of our members to pay to fly to Cincinnati, Ohio, to sit in a convention center for 4 days and then fly home. I don't know about you, but I'm not sitting on a plane for 14 hours to then sit in a convention center. I at least want to wind up at a beach after that. While there is, of course, a value to meeting in person, I'm learning that one of the massive benefits of a digital space is in the way that we can show up for each other on a regular basis. Rather than having 4 intense days of hyper-energetic interaction, which, yes, my extroverted self does love, but then to drop back down to 0, like a kid falling down from a sugar high after Halloween candy. Because we're online, we can embrace a consistency with our usual daily or weekly routines. We can fit the community into what already exists in our life. We can be more present to each other than I ever was able to be, despite my best intentions, with anyone at NCECA. As conversations were started and then cut short because the next thing was happening, or someone had to go to another talk, or someone saw someone else from across the room. As usually happens when I get passionate about something, I'm rambling now. So let me try to sum up my point here. If watching what seemed like every single maker you follow online show up to NCECA caused you to feel like you were missing out, or if you attended NCECA and still felt like you were missing out, or have been battling the massive shock of returning back to everyday life, where there isn't a ready group of people and makers willing to nerd out with you and actually wanting to nerd out with you, well, consider having a peek at the community. There's a 2-week free trial when you visit makersplaybook.com/community, and you are more than welcome to take advantage of it to have a peek around and see if it just might be the place for you. If it's not, no worries. Either way, you can learn more at makersplaybook.com/community. At the end of the day, no matter what, I just hope you find your people so that you can feel supported and stop having to worry about missing out, whether it be at the community or with a different group of people. Once again, this episode was sponsored by Amico.
Hi, I'm Jake, purchasing agent at Amico, providing you with everything you need for clay. This episode is brought to you by Amico Brent. Find your favorite Amico glazes or Brent equipment at your local distributor. Cheers for listening. Happy glazing.
Additional audio post-production of this podcast is made possible by help from Christy Kotsovan, with promotional material assistance from Queenie Maliki. The Maker's Playbook podcast is recorded on the original homelands of the Potawatomi, Ho-Chunk, and Menominee people, where the people of Wisconsin's sovereign Anishinaabe, Ho-Chunk, Menominee, Oneida, and Mohican nations remain present. Until next time, my friends, go get back to making your dreams a reality, because together, we've got this.